Welcome to my How Healthy Are You weekly educational podcast. My name is Dr. Thomas Brewer. I'm a PhD chemist and nutritional blood microscopist. Today is July 25th, 2022, and this is podcast number 128. It's going to be on aluminum toxicity. My next podcast will be in 3 weeks, August 15th. And if you're interested in an index for all the email, or at least all the podcast and newsletter topics, send me an email and I can forward you an index. So for today's podcast, it's about aluminum toxicity. The bad thing about aluminum, and it's a true toxin, it accumulates in the body and the brain. Now, our main source of aluminum in our bodies is from processed foods, especially pancakes that are pre-made and frozen pizzas. Now, there's other sources that aluminum gets into our bodies, and it's just as toxic, and that's cosmetics and deodorant. Deodorant's a real big one. And finally, vaccines. They also have aluminum as a carrier. Aluminum absorbs through our skin if we don't eat it, so it has numerous pathways into our body. Now, the reason we get a lot of aluminum is the most abundant metal on Earth, and it has many industrial applications. Now, I can see aluminum in a dry blood analysis. So instead of doing a live blood analysis, if I let the sample dry and I don't use my highest magnification, but if I use a lower magnification, after the blood dries, you can see the aluminum. It's blue dots, and that's how you know there's excess aluminum in the body. There are other tests, but that's a very easy test. And when aluminum gets into our body in a chemical form, the main ways are these 3 chemicals: sodium aluminum phosphate, aluminum sulfate, and aluminum hydroxide. So I wrote those down so that people could understand the words. I normally think of them as their chemical formula, but you'll see these words: sodium aluminum phosphate, aluminum sulfate, and aluminum hydroxide. That's the main ways that aluminum gets into our body. Now, once it's ingested, some of it and most of it should be excreted through our urine. But if there's kidney issues in a person, well, then it will start to accumulate. And if it does accumulate, it ends up in our bones, our liver, and our brain. Now, I do mention a way to cleanse the liver, or at least to heal the liver, in the newsletter, so keep an eye on that. So let's start with the bones. So there is a transport protein that's normally used to bind iron, and then that iron gets transferred to the bones, where it's very useful for the bones to regenerate. But if there's aluminum in the system, then aluminum gets transported to the bones. So instead of iron, you're getting aluminum transport, and what that does is it impairs bone mineralization. The aluminum also decreases the activity of vitamin D, and vitamin D is useful for calcium absorption. So in the end, you get weaker bones. Not a good thing. If we look at the brain and what happens with aluminum in the brain, aluminum actually crosses the blood-brain barrier. That's a bad thing, because normally only good things can cross the blood-brain barrier. So aluminum shouldn't be in our brains. There's no biological or biochemical purpose. It is a disruptor. It disrupts metabolic pathways, and it is linked to neurotoxicity. So there is this correlation with neurotoxicity. Remember, I talked a few weeks ago about the difference between a correlation and a causation. So a correlation just means you have some data and it's linked to, say in this case, to aluminum concentration and people with Alzheimer's, MS, multiple sclerosis, and autism. But that doesn't mean aluminum causes Alzheimer's, multiple sclerosis, and autism. There is just this correlation. But it's good to know that there is this bad correlation between aluminum presence in the brain and these horrible diseases. Now, aluminum toxicity in general, it's all going through our mitochondria, and it leads to mitochondrial dysfunction. So I talked about the mitochondria numerous times. They're the power plant of the cells, and the cells are really running everything. We have all these billions and trillions of cells in the body, and part of the cell is the mitochondria. And if your mitochondria are efficient, you'll have more longevity. Well, aluminum toxicity leads to mitochondrial dysfunction, not a good thing. So here's what we can do to protect ourselves from aluminum. First, you have to realize you cannot avoid aluminum exposure. Remember, it's the most abundant element or metal in the earth. But here are a few things. One, you can consume silicon, and our body will convert that to something called an aluminosilicate, and then it's easy to excrete the aluminum because the aluminosilicate will substitute out or at least the aluminum becomes part of this structure that's easily excreted from the body. Now, this is similar to what I did my PhD dissertation in on clays and zeolites. I'll be talking about zeolites in just a few minutes. But putting the aluminum in a matrix that can then get excreted from the body is one way to get rid of aluminum. Now, something I talked about when I talked about nutritional supplement scams was some unscrupulous companies, and many of them use silica, SiO2, sand, as a filler, and that's usually used in your cheaper vitamins. Now, who knew that this also has a benefit? Definitely not these manufacturers. They were using the silica as a filler, but it's much better to get silica from artesian wells such as Fiji water, another water source known as Aquafina water that has no silica. So your artesian wells have a decent amount of silica. That's a better way to get silica in your system rather than buying cheap supplements that use it as a filler. But this silica then has a way to bind with the aluminum and making a structure, an aluminosilicate, and then we can excrete that. Okay, the second way to protect ourselves is with selenium, and you would get that from Brazil nuts. You only need a few Brazil nuts a day. I recommended this as part of a COVID-19 protocol when I talked about that a while ago. Selenium helps make our glutathione active, and glutathione is really the best antioxidant in the body. It is made in the body. You don't really supplement with it. It's part of a metabolic pathway. So selenium is instrumental in that. Zinc, another way to protect ourselves from aluminum toxicity. Again, zinc's part of the COVID-19 protocol, and similar to selenium, it's part of the glutathione pathway. Fourth is to eat polyphenol-rich foods, so that's going to be fruits and vegetables, which I talk about all the time. As you age, eat less meat and eat more fruits and vegetables. So just gradually shift your meat consumption down as you age, and your fruits and vegetable consumption should increase as you age. The fifth one is kind of similar to the first one, but this is a true zeolite. And when you consume these zeolites, and some of you know what they are, and I know some of you even sell them, zeolites are ion exchangers. So in this case, the zeolite will have sodium in a cavity and it will exchange the sodium for aluminum. So the sodium ends up in our system, but the aluminum ends up in that zeolite cavity. And then the zeolite passes through the kidneys, similar to an aluminosilicate would. Again, I did my dissertation on clays and zeolite, so I'm very familiar with this. And the main zeolite for this is something you can buy. It's called clinoptrilolite. Clinoptrilolite. You'll see that as a form of zeolite that you can consume. I don't recommend you do this if you don't have a problem, but if you do, that would be a good way to pull aluminum out of the body. So in summary, the best way to deal with aluminum toxicity, don't eat processed foods, especially the pancakes, and also I didn't mention this, but it's the frozen pizza is really high in aluminum. Eat fruits and vegetables, have a few Brazil nuts a day. If you believe you have an issue, a Fiji water would be your best bottled water source. Try to use aluminum-free deodorants. They are much better now than they were in the past. It used to be the only deodorants that actually worked had aluminum, such as Mitchum, but you can find deodorants that actually work that don't have aluminum. And if I were to do a dry blood analysis and I see these blue dots, I would recommend a zeolite to pull the aluminum out of the body. So this concludes today's podcast. Please leave a comment, and please don't keep me a secret.